Hello, welcome to Issues and Ideas. I'm Chris DeBello.
Do you have that in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Let the record record that the witness has refused to answer whether there's a folder in front of him based on his Fifth Amendment right. Have you refused this pardon, or do you have any reason to believe this full and unconditional pardon, this grant of immunity, would somehow require you to plead the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Do you still refuse to answer the questions?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Were you ever made aware of gain-of-function research on monkeypox being conducted at the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasure Center and back at Fort Detrick?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Dr. Fauci, did the CIA ever transfer funds to NIH under an interagency agreement?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
That was an exchange between Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Anthony Fauci from this past week as Senator Paul tried to persecute, you tossed the coin, Dr. Fauci, which how laughable is that? An eye doctor telling a renowned expert on viruses and diseases that he doesn't know what he's doing, and he's lying about it. I mean, good God, the Fauci diary, which you can actually check out yourself, it's on our downloads page. You don't have to read all 1,100 pages. You can do a keyword search to get the points that you think are important, but how much more does Fauci have to put out there? 1,100 pages. And what's with the Republicans always looking backwards? Back at the election, back at COVID. Is this the Rocky Horror Picture Show? Are we doing the time warp now? And it's not just Fauci's work on the COVID virus that's pioneering. He was a driving force in the early days of research and finding solutions regarding the HIV virus. But when you consider that MAGA is rife with homophobes, that's probably just another mark against Fauci as far as they're concerned. Now, I'm never against finding the truth and calling out liars when they do exist. So with that being said, I think there's someone else who needs to be sitting in front of a Senate committee and providing answers.
Words about a pandemic at this point?
No, we're not at all, and we have it totally under control. It's one person.
We think we have it very well under control. Like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away.
When it gets warm, historically, that has been able to kill the virus. That's around the corner, so that will be a great thing.
The numbers are going to get progressively better as we go along.
And if you go back 6 months or 3 months ago, nobody would have ever predicted. When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done. No, I don't think it's inevitable. I don't think it's inevitable. They say, oh, he should do more. No, there's nothing more you can do.
We haven't seen an increase, and people are getting better. Almost everybody that we see is getting better. And it could be everybody, too.
The Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. They can't even count their votes in Iowa. They tried the impeachment hoax, and this is their new hoax. But, we did something that's been pretty amazing. We're 15 people in this massive country. The press is in hysteria mode. CNN, fake news, and their camera just went off. Unfortunately, one person passed away overnight. Since the early stages of the foreign outbreak, my administration has taken the most aggressive action in modern history. That really turned out to be a lifesaver in a sense, a big lifesaver. Some people will have this at a very light level and won't even go to a doctor or a hospital. They'll get better.
Anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're there. They have the tests. And the tests are beautiful. The tests are all perfect. The transcription was perfect.
And we're doing a great job with it, and it will go away.
Because of what I did and what the administration did with China, we have 32 deaths at this point.
Other countries that are smaller countries have many, many deaths.
It's a very contagious virus. It's incredible, but it's something that we have tremendous control of. You're talking about the virus? No, that's not under control for any place in the world. I think I read. No, I didn't. I was talking about what we're doing is under control, but I'm not talking about the virus. I've always known this is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. We have very great approval numbers. I mean, people like the job that we're doing. The only thing we weren't prepared for was the media. The media has not treated it fairly.
What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. I think it's a very nasty question. I've been right a lot. Let's see what happens, John.
A month ago, the CDC had an initial test that failed. At that moment, late February, you said it's perfect. And it wasn't perfect.
Well, what I said
in late February.
What I said is perfect was my conversation with the head of the Ukraine. That's what I really said is perfect. Okay, that was another whole scandal nonsense, a total, witch hunt. But nobody ever expected a thing like this.
We got to get back to work, and I think we can start by opening up certain parts of the country.
On Easter, we probably, that could be a peak. That could be a peak period. That could be the peak, sadly to say, that could be the peak number of deaths before it starts coming down. That this is going to be gone. It'll be gone. Hopefully gone for a long time. What do you have to lose? I'll say it again. What do you have to lose? Take it. I really think they should take it. Hydroxychloroquine. Try it, if you'd like. Did anybody in this room think a thing like this could happen? But it happened. They don't have to appreciate me at all. I don't care about me. I wish you'd ask the question differently. Why don't you say it's gotten off to a tremendous start, but there are some little glitches, which, by the way, have been worked out. I wish we had a fair media in this country, and we really don't. Speaking of unfair, go ahead. We have to get our country open, Jeff.
You say, sir, what metrics you will use to make that decision?
The metrics right here. That's my metrics. That's all I can do. There's always a risk. This is genius that we're fighting. We're fighting this hidden enemy, which is genius, okay? It's genius. The way it's attacked so many countries. All I'm saying is this. How do you close down the greatest economy in the history of the world when on January 17th you have no cases and no death? When on January 21st you have one case and no death. One case. Think of that. What we inherited from the previous administration was totally broken. We inherited broken testing. Now we have great testing. Today I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization. The head of a country doesn't have to say stay in. These people are smart people. Nobody ever thought this could have happened, a thing like this. We inherited a lot of garbage. We took, they had tests that were no good. They had, all this stuff was no good. It might not come back at all, Jeff. It may not come back at all.
We will have coronavirus in the fall. I am convinced of that.
COVID. To be specific, COVID-19. That name gets further and further away from China as opposed to calling it the Chinese virus. By the way, it's a disease, without question, has more names than any disease in history. I can name Kung Flu. I can name 19 different versions of names. When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people. You're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting.
Get the right folks who could.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number on the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. We would have had millions of deaths instead of, it looks like we'll be at about a 60,000 mark, which is 40,000 less than the lowest number thought of. I think what happens is it's going to go away. This is going to go away.
Is America a gun nation? All right, let's look at the numbers, see what they reveal. Population of America is 342.7 million. Latest studies show there's roughly 500 million firearms in America. So that breaks down to approximately 135 firearms for every 100 people. 32% of U.S. adults personally own a gun, and there's at least one firearm in 46% of U.S. households. Almost every week we hear news about another mass shooting. Places which used to be a refuge from danger and violence are now targets for violent danger. How did this become the way of America? Is it as simple as the Second Amendment, how it's been utilized, or is there more behind all this? Our first guest today with his new book reveals how more people and organizations have worked both separately and together to create today's gun culture in America. Part of the foundation of those efforts come from the ways that violence has long existed in America. His book is Ricochet, Guns, Greed, and the American Way of Violence. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist with the New York Times. Mike McIntire, thanks for being here today, Mike.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Two websites, MikeMcIntire.com, and, of course, check out Mike's work in New York Times, nytimes.com/buy/Mike McIntire. But don't worry, we do have those links over at our webpage for you to hopefully make use of. Said this to you before we started. There's been countless books explaining what's been going on with guns. You nailed down the hows and the whys. What was your roadmap, and as you traveled it, did you find more than you bargained for?
Yeah, good question. I mean, so I've been covering gun issues to one degree or another as a journalist for about 40 years now, and I'm also a gun owner myself. I've had personal experience with it, and I think that over time I kind of felt like, I had sort of a critical mass of information that I felt like I wanted to share. But in the course of putting the book together, I also learned a whole lot, which I wasn't completely aware of in the past. And one of the things I wanted to do with the book was kind of not just sort of chronicle, the debates around the Second Amendment and the evolution of the National Rifle Association and gun industry marketing, all of which are important. But I also kind of wanted to put it against a backdrop of our country's relationship, not just to firearms, but also just to violence in general. And the attempt here is not to kind of, make a sort of a polemic about America being a violent country, because every country has its own history of violence to some degree, and unique to that country, and America is no different. But in the United States, it really is interesting because, if you go back to the founding of the Republic, and even before, violence plays an important role. You can't subjugate a continent without a degree of violence. You can't rebel against the crown without violence, or conduct a civil war, or the institution of slavery. And all these things together, I think, kind of mix into an understanding of gun culture in America, and particularly the revolution, which I think is worth noting today as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country. That was really a foundational experience and a positive one, whereas if you look in Europe, for instance, with their experience with wars and conflict, it was often in ways that they probably would prefer not to remember. But here, it's really sort of the model of, created the idea of the citizen soldier, kind of picking up the musket and going out to defend liberty. And I think that when you see gun industry marketing today, that kind of is wrapped in the flag and heroism.
Much like we see with Donald Trump, what he's been trying to do now with the Smithsonian, trying to corrupt history with politics. Has the historic role of firearms, like you're mentioning, and you certainly feature in your book, has that history been corrupted in order to make the scenarios and the scenes that we see and we have to live through today?
Well, I think that, I don't know if corrupt is the right word. I think that maybe it's been taken advantage of in some ways by commercial interest or political interest. I think there's a lot to be proud of in terms of, how we freed ourselves from a despotic ruler in the revolution, and the role that the citizens' militia played, and guns are obviously integral to that. I do think, though, that over time, certain self-interests have kind of used that whole imagery in ways that are very, for political and ideological and commercial gain, to make guns sort of a cultural identifier and also kind of a political divider. And I think that's kind of unfortunate.
course, you talk about guns, gun rights, gun proponents, NRA comes to mind. There's also the Gun Owners of America, Second Amendment Foundation, and other organizations. What has been their greater empowerment? Has it been the politician or the courts?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. So I think that the groups you're talking about, the NRA in particular, over time kind of made it a project to basically identify in the Second Amendment an individual right to have a gun for purposes other than just the well-regulated militia, which is what the amendment says. And in doing that, it was sort of a decades-long project to kind of get the courts to adopt that point of view, which they eventually succeeded in doing with the Heller decision by the Supreme Court in 2008. And so I think that one kind of led to the other. I mean, I think that gun rights organizations really made the concerted effort beginning in the 1970s to sort of conduct a long game of achieving that, and using politicians, using the courts to do it, and they've succeeded probably better than they ever thought they would.
So Mike McIntire, investigative journalist for the New York Times, his new book, Ricochet, Guns, Greed, and the American Way of Violence, MikeMcIntire.com, the website, and you are listening to Issues and Ideas. We can go through the various tallies, and I used to have John Lott on the show, and talking about mass shootings with him became a headbutting situation because his grand idea was to lower the number of mass shootings in America, change the definition of a mass shooting, make it require more people to qualify as opposed to staying where it is. But how does the gun lobby, how does the NRA, although they fall on hard times, mainly self-inflicted, but how does the gun lobby survive the reality of the world that they are playing a significant role in creating?
It's one of the kind of bigger head scratchers if you think about mass shootings that have happened that are particularly bad and noteworthy, and every time it does happen, you expect afterwards something will change, and it rarely does. And I think a lot of it is just a testament to the power of the gun lobby. I mean, Sandy Hook is a good example, right? So in 2012, you had the massacre in Newtown, Connecticut, 26 children and adults killed. There was automatically a big push in Congress to do something. Bills were introduced to ban what people might consider assault weapons, also to impose universal background checks. And the NRA really kicked into high gear and used their clout to make sure that none of that stuff ever came to pass. I think, as you mentioned, the NRA since then has kind of waned a bit in their power and influence. A lot of it was sort of for internal reasons. But other groups have since kind of come to the fore, and there are other more almost extreme groups now, which are the ones taking the lead on litigation to try to knock down gun laws and continue to kind of roll the culture forward in ways that the NRA used to do, but I think has kind of ceded that position to other more aggressive groups.
And I think that's the mistake a lot of people make, too, when they're looking at the gun lobby. They think now it's down to the Proud Boys and the Promise Keepers, these rough around the edges, beer drinking, let's go play soldier in the woods and try to kidnap the Michigan governor. They're a lot smarter than we give them credit for.
Well, the groups that I'm thinking of who are the ones leading, like, for instance, spearheading litigation and stuff, the Firearms Policy Coalition is
right.
One, which is relatively new. Gun Owners of America, they've been around a while, but they kind of brand themselves as the no compromise group. And I think no compromise is a pretty good way to describe a lot of what you see in the gun rights movement today. I mean, they really have kind of adopted a pretty black and white view of what gun rights should be. And they're getting a lot of help, I should say, from the Trump administration this time around. Not so much the first time in 2016, but we're seeing now the federal government filing lawsuits against states to overturn gun bans, and that's unprecedented.
And even silencer bans. It's shocking the reaching they're trying to do. And this all, and as we go to the midterms, although I've noticed it, maybe I'm not paying enough attention. I don't see as many politicians boasting about their NRA ratings or any gun group ratings as they have in the past. But when you think about that, what does a politician have to do to get that high rating from the NRA or Second Amendment Foundation or Gun Owners of America? It certainly isn't something to protect people. It's more to protect the cause.
Well, traditionally the NRA ratings, would go to politicians that basically moved in lockstep with whatever the NRA's preferred policy prescriptions are. I think one of the reasons you probably don't see too much of it today is, ironically, I mean, they've gotten a lot of what they were looking for, and it just is not like a front burner political issue on a regular basis, unless and until tragically something bad happens that catches everybody's attention. But in the absence of that, you don't see it sort of being an issue talked about, because there seem to be so many other things capturing people's attention at any given moment. I think that's one of the frustrating things for the gun safety, gun violence prevention groups, is to try to capture sustained attention to the issue, because in the absence of a particularly bad mass shooting or something that happens that demands a big media response, you just don't sort of see much concerted attention being paid to sort of the daily trickle of bloodshed that comes in. Roughly 40,000 people a year are killed by guns, half of them suicides in the United States.
So, and again, I credit you with your book as far as explaining why and through the roots of that why, but with those roots being so deeply entrenched in history and utilized in not the ways they were intended to be utilized, what's one of the main ways that all that we're seeing today can actually be addressed? If we get the promises, along with the thoughts and prayers, of course, whenever a tragedy happens, but what are those seeking solutions up against, and how can they best overcome it?
One of the things I do talk about in the book is that for gun violence prevention groups that are looking for some strategy going forward, I think that interestingly they could look to the NRA itself as sort of a model. The NRA, as I mentioned earlier, sort of in the 1970s really set out a long-term agenda, and it was really their goal was a generational change that would pretty much take that length of time to achieve, but they did it, and they did it through sort of inculcating in the legal community a different view of what gun rights is about, a different view of the Second Amendment. They really worked to kind of change the culture around guns, and the industry itself is also involved in that. But that took a long time. That took decades. And, the seeds they planted in the 1980s, for instance, by supporting scholarship and books and law reviews and court cases, sort of espousing a certain view of gun rights, came to fruition in, the subsequent Supreme Court decisions, starting with Heller in 2008. There's nothing, I think, preventing gun rights or, gun safety groups kind of like, it's attempting something similar but pointed in the other direction. But it was not something that's going to happen overnight.
No, without a doubt. And again, for you listening, we know the what's. They're blatant. They're obvious. What is happening as far as guns in America, hows and whys are what will lead to solutions and actions. And that's what Mike does with his book, Ricochet, Guns, Greed, and the American Way of Violence. Check out Mike's work at MikeMcIntire.com as well as at nytimes.com. Mike, thank you for supplying those seeking solutions with the understanding and the empowerment. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you, Chris.
If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to follow as well as subscribe. I don't think I'm breaking news by saying that the cost of health care is high. This high cost forces people to make decisions which strongly impact their lives. One of the main catalysts for this high cost is the price of prescription, even over-the-counter medicines. Promise of affordability that generic drugs once presented has fallen prey to limits, even outright shortages. How has this happened? Are there solutions to correct the problem? How much cooperation by various parties is needed for those corrections to happen? All this is the focus of a report just released by the Coalition for Prosperous America that's titled The Hollowing Out of America's Medicine Cabinet. Joining us to share the findings of this report is senior economist with the Coalition for Prosperous America, Andrew Rechenberg. How are you today, Andrew?
Great. How are you?
Good to have you here with us today. ProsperousAmerica.org is where you can learn more about the work of the organization, as well as, of course, read the report, The Hollowing Out of America's Medicine Cabinet. Just for a baseline, Andrew, for the listener, define how the report classifies generic drugs.
Yeah, so generic drugs are the chemically identical copies of a lot of the brand name drugs that you could find. And so all these drugs, then they start when they're developed as brand name drugs, but once they get off patent, really anyone can manufacture these drugs and using the same active ingredients, the same dosage, same effect for a fraction of the price now that that patent has worn off. And so that's what we're looking at here. And today, these generics fill about 9 out of every 10 U.S. prescriptions because they are becoming by far the cheapest form of drugs you can get here in the U.S.
Which is certainly great to know they're there, but the challenge is to get to them. Now, we're based in New Jersey. That's at one point. I mean, it's changed a bit over the last few years, but we were a pharma-producing juggernaut in New Jersey. What had the U.S. market share been with generic drugs? And as your report displays, talk about how much it's declined over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is a great story that's really underappreciated. And exactly, in New Jersey, a lot of the counties outside of Philadelphia, these used to be some of the richest counties in the U.S., richer than Northern Virginia was at the time. And back in 2002, for example, the U.S. produced 72% of the drugs that we consumed, and back in 2002. And so this was the majority of the drugs that we consumed here in the U.S. They were made here in the U.S. But today that's down to 27%, the lowest on record. And this is just a huge collapse that we've had in just a generation, 45% less than it was back in 2002. And this is because of a few different things. U.S. drug consumption has, of course, grown in that time, but 99% of that growth has been captured by imports. And our drug imports right now are at a record nearly $300 billion worth in 2025, 7 times what was that in 2002. So really what we're seeing here is imports filling this new share of U.S. production, and it's driving prices so low that a lot of these counties, a lot of these manufacturers that manufactured here in the U.S. and New Jersey and across the country have been forced out of business because of it.
So in order to if they wanted to compete with the importing companies, it basically becomes a financially losing possibility for these companies.
Exactly. And it's also good to note that this was not a fair fight. This is U.S. companies having to compete with state subsidies from countries like China and India, and then also manufacturers in China and India and a lot of these countries not really being held to the same safety standards that we have here in the U.S. And this has been really documented in a number of FDA cases where there's been fraud overseas, there's been really poor standards, and the FDA finds these once they go check, but they just don't have the opportunity to check a lot of these foreign facilities as often as they check the ones here in the U.S. And so it's not been a fair fight. It's been state subsidies, it's been these lower standards, and that's what U.S. companies have had to compete with. And the prices have been really being forced too low to be manageable to make things in the U.S. for a lot of these products. But we still have some companies in the space trying to hold on.
Is the product that's being imported strictly the finished product, or do these imports also include the elements that could be, if accessible, wind up being completed pharmaceutical products made here in the U.S.?
Yeah, and this is a really good distinction because it's a little bit of both. And so one big thing that we look at is these finished products coming in, and this is primarily coming in from India. But increasingly what we're also seeing is that for some of the products that we do still make here in the U.S., they are becoming reliant on the base active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs, from countries like China. And India itself is also very reliant on China for these APIs. And for a number of products, for example, for antibiotics, you can have up to 90% of the global supply of these base pharmaceutical ingredients, these base chemical ingredients you need to make these medicines. They all are reliant on China. And so this is becoming a really big choke point in the system. And so it's really a little bit of both. We're importing more and more of these finished products, but even when we do make the finished product here in the U.S., they're reliant on these active pharmaceutical ingredients from countries like China as well.
So with Andrew Rechenberg, senior economist with the Coalition for Prosperous America, prosperousamerica.org is their website. You can also read their report, The Hollowing Out of America's Medicine Cabinet, and you're listening to Issues and Ideas. It's important to note, too, Andrew, what we are talking about as far as being imported and even being limited or shortages being created, these aren't fringe drugs for rare diseases. A lot of these are very commonly used elements, are they not?
Exactly. These are everyday medicines, and especially ones that we've been particularly looking into is ones needed in pediatric hospitals for especially liquid dose or a lot of times solid dose drugs. These are medicines you're taking every day. So it could be liquid form ibuprofen, very common things that are becoming more and more reliant on overseas. And it comes from a point where they originally want this to be cheaper, and so that's why they end up switching to a country like India and China in the first place. But what we're seeing is that when we have our domestic supply cut out, we're getting these shortages that happen because we're reliant on this overseas supply. We can't make it here in the U.S. And we particularly saw this with COVID, and that's when we see these 300 to 500% price hikes in these products when we can no longer source them domestically.
I guess that's the part people can't understand. If it's so profitable for these companies in China and India and a few elsewhere, why are there shortages? Are they not capable of meeting demands in their production?
So a lot of times that they are, but what really is the issue is that whenever there is a crisis in the supply chain, and so we really saw this with COVID, where countries like India were actually restricting their exports of certain medicines to serve their own markets first. And we didn't make a lot of these products or enough of these products in the U.S. anymore to supply everything. And then that's when we get these shortages. And then it also comes back to the quality issues. We've had one of the big cases that we've looked into is an explosion at a Chinese plant that made half of U.S. cisplatin supply, which is a necessary drug for chemotherapy. And once this happened, once they had this accident due to quality control failures, we had a shortage because there's just these crisis events that happen. And when there's no backup supply, when it's concentrated overseas, that's when we see these shortages. And that leads to price hikes. That leads to patients not getting their treatment. And it's really that's when the real crisis starts in healthcare system.
Speaking of crisis, where does the FDA come in on all this? Because these are products being imported. Do they go directly to the company? Does FDA have supervision? Is there inspection either domestically or overseas? What's the oversight on these products?
So that's one thing that the FDA is improving on, but historically there's been a lot of gaps in overseas FDA inspections, and a lot of these companies have gone 5 years or more without any FDA inspection at all, especially with COVID, when a lot of those inspections weren't as easy to do given all the closures and restrictions there. And when the FDA does go, they do find a lot of these problems, but the foreign facilities just aren't inspected as often and aren't able to be inspected as frequently as a lot of the U.S. plants are. And then FDA also gives advance notice for a lot of these foreign facilities. And then when this happens, what the FDA has actually found is that certain companies like Intas Pharmaceuticals in India have been dissolving safety records in acid or having to recall the batches tied to patient deaths. And so when the FDA does go, they find these problems, but the level of FDA oversight just needs to increase for the overseas facilities to be on U.S. standards.
So with all that being said by Andrew, and add to that, as if there has to be anything added to all that, the fact that the Trump administration is laying down a new set of tariffs on generic drug imports, 2-year grace period through July 2028, but then 100% at that point, and the penalty rate will double in August of 2029. When we all know when it comes to tariffs, that could change on a whim as well. So, Andrew, what was and your report doesn't just describe the hows and the whys and the whats, but you also provide solutions. What's one of the, out of the solutions and responses to this current situation, what is the most realistic and maybe the fastest acting one that should be and can be put into place?
Yeah, so I think that this tariff is also a great head start and a great beginning to recognizing a lot of the problems. I think that once you have 100% or even 200% tariffs, it's also important to recognize that a lot of these generic drugs are a penny a dose. And so you might even need a little bit higher of a percent than even what's being proposed right now to make a difference. But in addition to tariffs like this and really continuing down this path to make sure that these are effective, I think that another great thing that we can do is with the government procurement, what kind of drugs we buy for the military, for the Pentagon, for our healthcare systems, we can start actually rewarding resiliency in the system. We can start buying American-made drugs. We can start actually rewarding quality and good domestic supply rather than always just prioritizing the lowest bidder, and actually looking at how we can build resilience and quality in the supply chain system. And I think that's an easy thing that any administration can do at any point, is at least start with that demand signal that the government is investing in quality here in the U.S.
You can read the results, the findings of the report, The Hollowing Out of America's Medicine Cabinet, at the website for Coalition for a Prosperous America at prosperousamerica.org. He is a senior economist, Andrew Rechenberg. Andrew, thank you for the understanding of what is happening, why it's happening, and more importantly, the solutions and answers that now with that tariff timetable I just relayed, a lot of people are on the clock right now, and hopefully they will respond and not get shut out and cost the Americans more than they're already spending on health care. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Just as we do every time here, we have a whole host of conversations going on over at our Facebook page, and you're cordially invited to join in and contribute. You can find our Facebook page through the link at our website homepage. Of course, that's issuesandideasradio.com. The arts and culture have been certainly under attack for some time, a variety of ways, financially, politically. When those attacks succeed, they result in a huge loss of access to creative works of others, a host of entertainment sources, learning opportunities, and for communities, a resource which truly serves, grows, and provides in many positive ways. Thankfully, New Jersey is one of the few states that gives a full recognition of the importance and value of the arts, with a focus on creating preserving locations to serve as host for them. My next guest heads one of these New Jersey venues, which has received funding through a state program, which will result in a new era for a historic location. He's the president of the Rialto Center For Creativity in Westfield, New Jersey. Bill Crandall, thanks for being here today, Bill.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. We're so excited in Westfield. It's a 100-year-old theater, and thanks to this award from the state of New Jersey and the work to come, we have plans for the next 100 years. We couldn't be more excited in Westfield.
And we'll give you listening to the website. It's also on the homepage, too, because you can play a role in what's to come in all this. RialtoWestfield.org, and you'll learn more about the facility and what is to come. Now, this is all through a program for the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. It's called the Cultural Arts Facility Expansion Cafe Program for short. And you have received, to say the least, a very sizable grant with to the tune of $43.3 million. How much of a need did the Rialto have, and what is this going to mean for the Rialto?
Yeah, so what it is, it's an award. It's a tax credit award that the cafe gives out, and it's for the development and rehabilitation of cultural arts facilities. So they see that as a key component of the state's economy. So in short, Chris, they believe in places where people gather around for the arts as a key part of the economy, and they believe in the Rialto, and that's what this shows. What this means, to your question, is that a 100-year-old theater in the center of our town, where people have been gathering for more than a century, is now going to move forward, and we're going to now update it to evolve to, current habits. If we were designing something, we wouldn't make a six-theater theater in 2026. So now it's going to be a place for movies, absolutely, and we love movies at the Rialto, but it's also going to have live music. It's going to have art. It's going to have theater, education, community events. So it's going to be a flexible space that's going to be able to really adapt to the evolving needs of the community.
So in a way, this is going to mean the Rialto isn't going to be there for people to go to. It'll be a facility to reach out to people, to encourage them to grow in arts and learn, like I said back in the introduction, take full advantage in a multifaceted way about what the concept of the arts provides.
That's exactly right, because when I was a kid growing up, you would go to the movies and that would be your interaction with the arts. And it's like now, obviously, through TikTok and everything else. I mean, my daughters growing up, they were reaching out to Buffy the Vampire Slayer through Instagram and getting replies back. So arts have become so much more of an interactive medium. So the Rialto is going to be a place for people to create, people to teach, people to learn, collaborate, as well as perform and enjoy those performances. So really all the 180 sides of the creation and enjoyment of the arts.
And with the Rialto being a historic location, 100 years plus, I mean, you and I have both seen in the past, all across the country, you have this historic building designed to be a theater, and the quick go-to had always been to, well, let's make it a place to show silent movies. We'll go back to the history of the building. it's a nice idea, but not always a long-lasting success. So this certainly is a much more positive path. When you made the application for the grant, how much of the plan did you have to have in mind? Because obviously the state's not going to drop money and cross their fingers. They want as sure of a bet as they can possibly have.
That's exactly right, Chris. No, we went through a rigorous process to get this award. It was, 9 months of review and everything. And with that, we did our own business analysis, and we went out and wanted to make sure that we weren't just building something for 2026, 2027, but that we're building something that would be durable. And that, got us to our flexibility to make sure that as behaviors, change and needs change of the community, that the Rialto would be ready for that. But right to your point, we went out to the entire business community and also figured out how they would use the space, what would be the halo effect impact of the space, all that stuff, because that was a core part of the application.
Talking with Bill Crandall, who heads the Rialto Center for Creativity. It's in Westfield, New Jersey, Westfield.org, their website, and you're listening to Issues and Ideas. A long-lasting building is certainly part of the foundation of any community. How important is it for the community that the Rialto exists, and how can it play a role? Because, as you mentioned with businesses need people. It's always great to have a local consumer base, but to reach out to neighboring communities and grow the population that come into a town or a city. I'm going to go back to, I remember in Dover, New Jersey, in the northwest part of the state, there was the Baker Theater, and that started to languish off as a movie theater. They tried concert halls. I mentioned the showing old movies, and it just surrendered itself to the times instead of fighting to maintain not just its own existence, but to strengthen the community's existence. What are some of the steps you're going to take to follow that route?
Yeah, so we are right in downtown Westfield, which is quite a gathering space in and of itself. So there will be the halo effect on the shops and restaurants and everything. But right to your point, last week we had Kevin Feige as our guest. He's the president of Marvel Studios. He's got a big Spider-Man movie just opening. And he grew up in Westfield, and he grew up watching Star Wars as a kid and playing with the action figures in his backyard, and he dreamed of going to film school. And he made the point, and he said, you know what, theaters were that third space. They are one of those third spaces, and it's important, and he really believes in what we're doing with the Rialto, because it's important outside of school and work and home for communities to have places to come together, and that's what makes us a community. So the Rialto is going to be one of those places that you're just going to walk by and see what's going on. Oh, wow, somebody's recording a podcast just like this. I'm going to sit and listen. I'm going to create my own podcast. That is the seeds that will, be born at the Rialto. And then from there, when we're done, let's go get some lunch and let's go do all the things that people do downtown in a community. So that's why the town of Westfield is so excited about it.
So you got the funding. Now comes the hard work. What are the immediate steps and long-term steps, and how can the person listening right now help in everything that's about to unfold?
Thank you. Yes. So the $43.3 million, again, believes that the state really believes in our project, and now we have to finish the job. So we're launching a campaign for $10 million. That is going to go to completing our construction, funding our early operations, and then unlocking these state funds. So if people are through our website, rialtowestfield.org is where you can donate. Also figure out, connect with us as far as if you're interested in volunteering. And that's what we're going to be doing now is really getting together, getting that community support out there, and finishing the whole job.
And as far as volunteering opportunities, what's the type of expertise or materials that you need for at least for the immediate steps?
A passion for the arts. We're really looking for people to spread the word. We're going to be doing community engagement. We have everything from open houses at the Rialto to our Spotlight Series events. There's such a great community of people from Westfield. Lucy Ritter, I actually used to coach her softball, and she then became Chapel Roan's drummer. So she went on to play Coachella and Saturday Night Live, and so that's the kind of full circle we have going on in Westfield. So and we're going to need everybody to, get out to their community, spread the word to their friends, get the word out to donate. But we're going to be going to everything from, we have our fall festival coming up, and we'll have a table there, like all that wonderful stuff of just spreading the word and letting everybody know what we're planning to do here now and in the next 100 years in Westfield. And quite frankly, invite everybody to be a part of it. We want to hear, what would people like to do at Westfield? How would you like to have your own creativity shine and become a part of this?
That's always a great feeling, too, for you listening, to look at something at the beginning, be a part of it, and once it comes to the next stage or its conclusion, to be able to say, yeah, I made that happen. I was a part of that team that created and finished a great work that's going to be a lasting, really shining element of a community, not just an individual. There's a huge difference. Too many try to aim for the individual, and what's going to be unfolding with the Rialto Center for Creativity is definitely for the people. And you'll find out more about the opportunities, the future, the plans, how you can become a supporter of it, a part of it, at rialtowestfield.org. We have the link to that page over at our website. He is the president of the Rialto Center for Creativity in Westfield, New Jersey, Bill Crandall. Bill, like I said, you've got the direction, you've got the vision, and you've got the people, you've got the team, you've got success right in front of you. I know it'll become sooner versus later, and thank you so much for enlightening us, inviting us into your vision, and for being here today.
Chris, thank you so much. It's so appreciative for you to spread the word on what we're doing here. I appreciate it.
Conspiracies are a lot like dandelions. Once they show up, man, they are really tough to kill. In the aftermath of Dr. Anthony Fauci's appearing before a Senate committee, the 6-year-old conspiracies about the COVID-19 virus, especially the COVID vaccines, they saw their return loudly, didn't they? Now, I'll go even further back in time. Back to the days of the MDA telethon Jerry Lewis hosted for decades. All through those decades, the conspiracy was, Jerry's getting a piece of the action from what was raised every Labor Day weekend. He wasn't, yet even though Jerry did his final telethon, 16 years ago now, that conspiracy continues to flourish. Why is that? Well, much like with dandelions, rather than dealing with the bloom, you need to take care of the root. It's also important to know that many who spew conspiracies will, in their very next breath, claim to be Christians. 1 John chapter 2, verse 4 addresses these people. Whoever says, I know him, but does not keep his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. So let's spend some time today examining the roots of conspiracies, because there are actually quite a few. Perhaps the most frequently found root of conspiracies is a lie. A lie is used to feed a conspiracy meant to bring people to something wrong, even dangerous to believe in. A lie serving as the root of a conspiracy to draw someone to a false belief has been around really since the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. Proof of this is found in Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. But the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, meaning the fruit from the tree of life, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Jesus in Matthew chapter 8, verses 42 through 44, reveals the truth about those who push conspiracies of lies. Jesus said to them, If God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. You are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. If you're one who stands with liars, embracing their conspiracies, there's a warning from Jesus in Revelation chapter 21, verse 8, not only establishes the company that you keep, but also foretells what your destiny is going to be. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Personal gain, or greed, if you will, that's another root of conspiracies. Those who spout them seek the earthly over the heavenly. They're deaf and blind to the words we find in 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. For For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. Jesus in Mark chapter 8, verse 36, talks about their present and future. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? So think about that. Is that someone who you want to stand with? There are actually way too many in the pulpit who push conspiracies by corrupting the Word of God. It's called the prosperity doctrine, where they claim if you give 100 to them, God will reward you with 1,000. Jesus in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, shuts them all down. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Corruption, that's another root of conspiracies. The corrupt who bring about conspiracies do so in order to justify their wrongs by having as many people join in supporting them. James chapter 3, verse 16 alerts us to these people. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. Going back to the Old Testament, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 4, here's their method and goals. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth, for the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 through 15, reveals who these conspirators are. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. And finally, those who promote conspiracies do so in order to give strength and support for their judgment of others. This root could be considered a relative of hate, but where hate is used with anger and force, judgment is used in an attempt to justify an attack on a person or a group. Oh, where to begin? Jesus tells those who judge what their priority should be, according to Matthew chapter 7, verse 3, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Well, those who judge through conspiracies say they do so through God's word. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5 teaches this truth. Therefore, do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness, and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Then each one will receive his commendation from God. In the 8th chapter of John, we read the story of the people in the temple coming to Jesus with a woman who committed adultery. They tell Jesus that the penalty is for her to be stoned, and then ask what he thought. What happened next is told to us in John chapter 8, verses 6 through 9. This they said to test him, meaning Jesus, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger in the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. The aftermath of this had Jesus acknowledge to the woman that her accusers were no longer there to condemn her, neither did he, and Jesus sent her away with the direction not to sin again. The belief of this scene by Bible scholars is that Jesus wrote in the dirt the names of those accusing the woman and their sins. There's actually a prophecy foretelling this. It's found in Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 13. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth. Additionally, this action of Jesus, with him writing truth with his finger, absolutely connects with what God gave to Moses. And how? Let's go back to Exodus chapter 11, verse 18. And he gave to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God. So to those who create conspiracies, and to those who embrace and even enforce them, I ask, if Jesus crouched down to write your name in the sand, what would he write next to it? Don't forget to check out our website, issuesandideasradio.com. You'll find more information about the guests who joined us here on the show today. More of the features on the homepage. We have information all throughout the site. It's all found at issuesandideasradio.com. radio.com. Always thankful and grateful for your time, your attention, very valuable and important to us, and look forward to being with you right here this time next week for our next edition of Issues and Ideas.